Kal, so nice to meet you.
See you, Sy.
So I'm here with Kal Patel, the president of BrightInsight, which is a Flex company. And we're here for JP Morgan's healthcare conference, which is more or less the Burning Man of biopharma. So Kal, let's talk a little bit about BrightInsight and what this platform's kind of all about.
Yeah, BrightInsight is what we call a regulated IoT platform.
Mm-hmm.
What we mean by that is we're seeing this big push by pharma and medtech to get their products connected, to build in Bluetooth connectivity or some other way unlock data from the patient and get it to a place in the cloud or somewhere where you can use it to generate insight. Mm-hmm. But in other industries, you have a set of challenges. In healthcare, those challenges are additional because you have to manage all the privacy, security, and regulatory aspects of that data. And what BrightInsight does is it's a platform that manages all that on behalf of our pharma and medtech customers. So we integrate into medical apps, algorithms, connected drug delivery devices, therapy delivering devices. Really doesn't matter what the source of that medical grade data is, but we manage all of the privacy, security, and regulatory requirements, and it doesn't matter where in the globe you are.
So, explain to me, like, I'm someone who knows nothing about the digital health sector. If I'm just your average consumer, your average patient, how might my information be leveraged via the BrightInsight system?
Yeah, so let's talk about some diabetes as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So Novo Nordisk is one of our customers, big partnership we have with them, and they're building all of their connected devices and drugs on top of BrightInsight. And so a common vision here would be a patient is on an insulin product, and they may or may not be remembering if, when, and how much insulin they should be taking. Mm-hmm. By ingesting data, let's say from their glucose monitor, as well as knowing what they're doing in terms of activity, in terms of eating, et cetera, you can use that information to both help guide the patient potentially to how much insulin they should be taking, but at a minimum, you can use that information to help remind them to check their blood glucose level, as well as remind them to take their drug, right? And if you look at that sort of small issue about taking medication adherence as we call it, that's a massive problem in healthcare. Mm-hmm. As I'm sure most of us are aware, even if we're not in healthcare, the average person only takes about half their medication, right? And so if you don't take it, you're not going to get the benefit of it, right? And so if you know whether or not someone's using the product, you can use that information to help in a very personalized way, give them those reminders or those incentives to say, hey, you should be able to, here's a reminder you forgot to take that medication.
So that's kind of the consumer patient-facing side, and that's obviously a very important issue for medical providers. But on the flip side, when we're talking about, say, the purposes of drug development or clinical trial design, how does the use of this kind of technology work with that, which is a very specific and different kind of process than just, monitoring adherence?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of different ways to add value through the R&D process. So I'll give you some examples. And one is today, in a typical R&D trial, we actually collect very little data. It may seem like we collect a lot, and some measurements we do, but we actually collect very little of the potential amount of data you can be gathering. And most of that data is collected through testing when a patient comes in and gets laboratory work or a physical exam, or patient-reported outcomes. They're writing stuff down, answering a questionnaire. But what about the rest of the 99.9% of the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you can imagine, for example, a patient having a wearable, right? An important area where we're seeing a lot of interest right now is in the immuno-oncology space. So as these very innovative, transformative drugs are coming out, one important thing to do is monitor the patient for what could be lethal side effects. Mm-hmm. And if you send a patient home with a $500,000 treatment, but a $2 thermometer, versus sending them with a on-body wearable that can measure their body temperature continuously, mm-hmm. and in a much more diligent and proactive way, identify if that patient might be having, for example, a fever, and get them early back into the system to address that side effect. That's the kind of thing that we're seeing happen within the R&D space.
So pharmaceutical companies, I believe the most recent Deloitte report about the 12 major kind of biopharma companies found that ROI on their research and development has actually plummeted to a new low. It was already at an abysmal kind of rate in 2017, and 2018 it fell even more. Do you think that these kinds of digital technologies have the potential to help boost that ROI, and if so, how?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think there's two schools of thought when you look at data like that. One school of thought is to say, wow, our return on investment is going down, so we need to be more careful with the cash that we're investing and not do these quote unquote extra or optional digital investments. I think the other way to look at it is to say, because you're not getting the kind of ROI from your traditional core R&D, you actually need to look at this as a way, to your point, really enhance and improve return on investment. And there's multiple ways we see that. The first is around in the R&D process itself, how do you accelerate clinical trials? Today, anybody who's designing clinical trials will tell you that they have to overscope the population size because they're going to have drop off during the trial process, right? And so again, if you're monitoring adherence, you're monitoring patient engagement, you can improve the percentage of patients that follow all the way through to the end of the trial, which lets you have less patients enrolled, and that saves you money, right? And more importantly, it also saves you time. So you have a lot of other things you can do in terms of accelerating clinical trial. And the second thing you can do is you can use this type of data to bring in to really differentiate the product. So if you think about things like value-based healthcare, and you want to show not just what happened from a clinical endpoint, but how do you actually develop a solution that shows the real-world impact? Well, how are you going to measure that? These types of digital solutions really give you the ability to collect data points that can be used to improve clinical outcomes, as well as show that data back to the payers that the therapy is working in the real world. And I think that becomes the basis for improving ROI.
So we're still at kind of the beginning, I would say, of the era of digital health.
Yes.
There's been a lot of hype around the field in general, but as far as tangible results go, we're still in the very early stages. When do you think we're going to see the actual revolution from all of this kind of technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. There has been a lot of hype. There's been a lot of investment. I think we're now just hitting that tipping point of people saying, okay, let me appreciate and understand what is it going to solve to go from pilots to real scalable solutions. And the reason I believe that it isn't going to be, to answer your question, in the next 5 or so years is we're seeing a confluence of a few factors that give me that conviction. The first is we're finally seeing the shift from digital health dollars going into what I would say are consumer-oriented solutions, things that sit outside of the regulatory regime, to now a lot of investment going squarely into regulated digital health, right? And which is why we've also built the BrightInsight Platform. And so now you have pharma and med tech companies and other disruptors saying, hey, if I really want to change healthcare, I got to do it within the context of regulatory, privacy, and security, not outside of it. I got to do it in the context of reimbursement and getting paid for this innovation, not outside of it, right? And so I think that's one of the key signs for me. The second is just the sheer fact of the investment we're seeing in terms of chief digital officer roles, right? In companies, in major pharma and med tech companies, and below them, the kinds of organizational investments that are being made. And then the third I'll say is from our vantage point at BrightInsight, as part of this broader Flex organization, we work with almost all of the major pharma and med tech companies out there. And there's barely a customer we have that isn't thinking about or making major investments in things like building connectivity into their drug delivery devices, figuring out how to leverage sensors to collect more data on clinical trials, et cetera. So we're seeing that real investment in the front lines of where innovation really happens.